Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Bryan, COO here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. On today's episode, I am super excited to have Steven Vynckier as our guest. Steven is a founding partner of Spotit, a cybersecurity managed services firm headquartered in Belgium with its U.S. operations in Raleigh, North Carolina. Steven is a 20-year cybersecurity veteran and served the last 10 running the business at Spotit, which he launched in 2014 with his founding technical partner, Frederick Reichert. During our conversation, we dive into the history of Spotit, what their experience has been like entering the U.S. market, and what U.S. companies can learn from European companies, and vice versa. We wrap up with Steven sharing his thoughts on where he sees perception gaps around cybersecurity and what excites and scares him about the future. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Steven Vynckier. Steven, welcome to Cut the Shit. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you, Bryan. How are you?
I'm great. Wanted to welcome you as the first international guest to Cut the Shit. We're excited to have someone from across the pond in Belgium. So it's just after 5 o'clock there, I believe. That's correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and thank you for having me.
Terrific. Got a bunch of good stuff to talk about today. Before we even jump in, I did want to kind of, in the interest of full disclosure, let the audience know Spotit has become a partner of Plow's. We're really excited to have them as our MSSP partner, and so they'll be our go-to for customers who need help with specific SOC services. Incident response plans, virtual CISO, those sorts of things. So we're just getting this going, but we're really excited about it. So Steven, excited about our business venture working together, and also to hear what you've got to say. We'll sharing some thoughts as we go through the podcast today.
Yeah, very good. I'm looking forward to it. Let's dive in.
Absolutely. So before we get started, I've asked this question a couple of times and gotten some interesting answers. So I figured I'd give it a shot with you since you're our first European guest. Can you give us an example of the most interesting use of technology, like a hack or something unusual that you've seen maybe in the past couple of years? It might even go back into the pandemic period, something that you've seen that kind of struck you or grabbed your attention.
Yeah, Bryan. So what we saw lately is that there's a worrying thing about the insider threats, mainly on the fact that what we see is that employees from companies that they get bribed. What the hackers want is that they click on a link. So they click on a link, and then the hackers can go into the company much more easily. And they get a lot of money for that, or well, actually for just clicking a little bit of money. If they actually get in through clicking on that link, they get a little bit more money. And if they can actually, steal important information and the company has to pay eventually for that, then they get a piece of the cut. And that's very worrying because, of course, everybody can get bribed. And now with gas prices are up and inflation is going up and that kind of stuff, it's very worrying that we see that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure, because even we assume most of our defenses around that stuff so far have been phishing or takeover, assuming the good intentions of employees. This is flipping the script on that a bit, and really we're assuming employees with bad intentions who have access to hopefully not everything if we've got good segmentation, but certainly have access to some things, right?
That is exactly right. So it's very worrying.
I got it. Yeah, thanks for starting us off on a positive note, Steven. I appreciate that. All right, well, let's get to the main event. So before we get started, Steven, how about give us a quick thumbnail sketch on you personally, a little bit of the bio, and then we'll kind of talk some about Spotit.
Okay, so my name is Steven Vynckier. I'm a father of two teenagers, a girl and a boy. In my free time, I do a lot of cycling, as all Europeans do. And professionally, I studied economics in Brussels, in Belgium, and then I started in IT, and more specifically in cybersecurity. So I have 20 plus years of experience in information technology. Let's put it that way. So that's in short my bio. I've worked with one of the biggest integrators in Europe. I was one of their VPs over there, and before I started Spotit together with my partner in 2014.
And your partner, Frederick, he was also at that company, correct?
He was also at that company. I'm more the sales financial guy, and he's more like the brains of the company. He's the technical guy, and he knows of everything. I just know how to explain it. That's all.
Right. Well, you need both of those.
Exactly.
As anybody who worked in IT or has worked with someone in IT can tell you, there's oftentimes brilliant people who can't explain it to the average Joe, and that can become a problem, right? In terms of delivering good service. So, you hinted at Spotit's origin story, but why don't you walk us through sort of how Spotit came to be, and then kind of we'll talk a little bit about from that point to where we are today.
Yeah. So, like I said, I was with one of the biggest European IT companies, IT integrator. They actually do everything from infrastructure over to ERP and everything in between. I was the VP of infrastructure, hosting, and remote management, and I was responsible for Belgium, the Netherlands, Poland, and Romania. And of course, I have several business lines that I had to report. And all of a sudden, one of the business lines, which is called cybersecurity, was tripled. And we weren't not doing anything about it. We weren't like doing a lot of marketing or anything like that. It tripled. So what I did, I asked the company leadership to invest in that and to make sure that we put the right people on there and the right technology, because I think in cybersecurity, quality is everything. And they said, well, that's a very good idea. We should do that, but we're not ready for it yet. We're not going to do it as of now. And that's when I said, well, then I'm going to do it myself, right? So then I talked to Frederick, and we started up the company in 2014, focusing solely on networking and cybersecurity, and especially cybersecurity, of course.
So you said networking and cybersecurity. So talk a little bit about that combination, because in the U.S. that's a somewhat unusual pairing when it comes to what I'd call pure play cybersecurity operations.
Yeah, and it's a bit the same here in Europe. So you see a lot of bigger companies that do everything amongst NOC and SOC and everything around that. And then you see pure play cybersecurity specialists that only do maybe SOC or MSSP or just some professional services around.
Right.
But we think it's crucial and key that you have both, that you have the cybersecurity, the SOC, and that you have networking NOC, because good cybersecurity starts with a good network. If you don't have a good network and you start putting all those tools in place with cybersecurity, it won't work. You will leave holes open for attackers to find holes in and to try to get into your company. So for us, they really go in hand. Another great example is one of our SOC specialists or analysts finds something. It is crucial that you act fast. You can act fast if you also have the full control of the NOC, so that when you see something, that you can give it to the NOC, and the NOC can immediately solve the issue. That is why also our partnership is so important to us.
Absolutely. And that was the strategy from the beginning, correct?
That was a strategy from the beginning. Yeah, that is correct. Yeah. So 24/7, making sure that we take full control of network and security issues for our customers. So we take full responsibility of it if the customer wants that. Of course, there's also some levels in between if customers want different things. But that was the whole upset from the beginning. So we didn't start like a lot of other companies by selling firewalls and software and licenses. No, we started from day one as a managed services provider.
Got it. And so talk to me a little bit about kind of the early days in terms of the customer footprint and sort of the evolution of that since you're 9 years, almost 10 years in at this point. So what did the early days look like, and what are you taking? Because usually there's some twists and turns that's not unusual. Perhaps yours is more linear, but I'd be interested to hear that.
Yeah, it's a little more linear, I think, because we already had a focus from the beginning that we wanted to focus companies between 200 and 10,000 employees. We don't discriminate on sector, so we sell in every sector. So we started to focus on companies that has a local decision power in Belgium, but had an international footprint. So we started with those kind of companies, and ever since we grew and grew and grew in those companies. Of course, we didn't grow in every sector. And we have actually 4 sectors that we grew in rapidly, which is pharma, pharmatech, and life sciences as one, manufacturing, logistics, and utilities. Those are the 3 big ones, but of course we have other smaller ones as well.
Got it. And as you think about those sectors, I'm assuming that happened primarily just sort of organically based on relationships and then word of mouth and that sort of thing?
That is exactly correct.
And are there, I mean, obviously network is network, but at some point there's, a pharma tech, the flavor of theirs and their needs and their challenges may be different than, say, manufacturing or utilities. Where are the through lines, or where do you feel like there's similarities across those? Maybe it's as much around the way you couch risk and think about risk as opposed to the actual work itself. That may be a little bit of an odd question. Just curious to think about or to hear you talk about the sort of the shared zeitgeist around security across these fairly specific sectors.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that's similar is that the way we start. We always start. We want to be the cybersecurity partner that really knows the business value of our customers. So what they want to achieve in the market, we want to be supporting of that. I'll give you an example. Some of our customers, they're into pharmatech, so R&D is extremely important to them. So cybersecurity should be focused on R&D. Then we have manufacturing. What they think about or what they want is that their production doesn't stop, right? So we need to focus on cybersecurity on that part mainly. Of course, the others are also important, but that's so you need to look at what is driving their business, what is their crown jewels in cybersecurity, and first protect those, and then look at the others. That is how we approach things. And of course, in different sectors, there's different crown jewels to protect.
Right. So it helps with sort of a prioritization of needs and focus. Right, because you're always dealing in a world of finite resources, right? I know as a managed service provider, we'd love for a customer to say, "Hey, blank checkbook, whatever you need us to do, whatever you want to do, go for it," right? But we know that that's not really how it works, so you have to sort of prioritize, and I get what you're after there. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit, sort of today. Give us a sort of a thumbnail sketch of the company, kind of where you are, coverage areas, employees. Revenues or other sizes, if you're comfortable with that kind of, just so that the audience has an idea of sort of what Spotit looks like right before you entered the U.S. market, because I want to talk about that next.
Okay. So right before we entered the U.S. market, we were about 100 people in Belgium. We delivered our service already in 80 countries on 5 continents. But like I said, most of the companies originated in Belgium and have a local decision power for IT in Belgium, but we delivered in 80 countries. We did a revenue about $22 million, of which 70% was managed services. And we had 3 locations, all 3 in Belgium. So Ghent, if you know Belgium, it's in Ghent, Hasselt, and Antwerp. So it's a medieval town, even older town, and then diamonds. That's where we were located. We had 3 locations, not because we want to have 3 locations, but it was to find talent, because talent in cybersecurity is, of course, a big thing. And what we really like is that nobody from our people had to stand in traffic jams. It was also before COVID, so everybody came to the office.
Right.
And traffic jams is not good for us and not good for the employee itself. So that's why we had 3 offices.
Got it. Okay, so that brings us to the decision to enter the U.S. market. Tell us about that decision, and how's that part of the broader sort of follow the sun strategy that you've talked to us about?
Yeah, so there were 3 reasons why we went abroad. The first reason was to follow our customers. Like I said, we had a lot of customers that had already an international presence. And we actually asked them first in which country that they would like us to start another office. We suspected that they would say like UK or Germany or France, the neighboring countries, right? But actually 80% of them said, well, US would be very interesting to us, right? So that was the first reason why we went abroad, to follow our customers. Second, and actually the most important one, is finding talent. In Belgium, of course, there's a pond of talent, but if you broaden the pond, it's more easily to find good talent. And the third reason is, like you said, operational excellence. If you go abroad and you go to a different time zone, then of course you can make sure that the follow the sun has more international touch to it as well. So those were the three reasons. And now we started in the US, and within 2 to 3 years, we also want to start in Asia. And then we have a true follow the sun, and we can start up sales offices all over the globe. But in those three countries, Belgium, US, and it will be Malaysia or Singapore, we want to be head offices, meaning that we're not just going to sell out of them. We're actually going to build knowledge. We have a full stock knowledge, everything R&D within that headquarters.
So integrated, but in many ways individual operating units as well, where they could stand alone, so to speak, if necessary, or really if you just sort of if you decide to split them up, you could.
That is exactly correct. So because what we saw is some of our Belgian customers that don't have an international presence, what they really want is they want a 24/7 out of Belgium. And I can assume that US companies that don't have any subsidiaries out of the US also want a 24/7 delivered out of the US. So it should be possible that you, as a customer, that you can choose for a model that is a follow the sun, that follows the globe, or that has a local 24/7. Both options should be available to them.
Got it. Okay, that helps. So that helps explain sort of the entry decision. It's been maybe a year plus at this point. Is that about where you guys are in terms of getting going? Okay, so it's early days, but I know from our conversation you guys are having some success. So congratulations on that. Kind of in the sort of the early returns phase, what are some of the similarities and differences that you're seeing between the two markets? And again, it's early, but just curious to get your initial reactions to. And in this case, obviously, we're not talking about your Belgian customers who maybe have U.S. operations. We're talking about net new U.S. companies that you guys are talking to.
Yeah, if I look at similarities, I would name two. First of all, and I think it's a global thing. The attacks are everywhere, right? So it's crazy. Every week we get calls from prospects that are hacked that we need to help right now, and it's not only US that way. It's everywhere, right? So that's one major thing that is a similarity. Secondly, is the lack of talent. It's also a global thing, I presume. It's of course the pond in the US is much bigger. You have a lot of more people here, so a lot more talent. But even so, it's hard, especially for companies, to find the right talent to have cybersecurity. That is why, outsourcing your network and security to people like us makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So those are the similarities, I think. Then, if you look at the differences, I think one big difference that everybody knows and everybody talks about is personal data. In Europe, you have something like that we call the GDPR. Which regulates a lot of the things that around personal data and how you have to, as a company, how you have to cope with that. You cannot just take everybody's data and do stuff with it, right? It's a bit different here in the US. You're taking steps, but you're a little bit behind if you look at Europe. And the second difference I would say is that American companies are invested more in cybersecurity than in Belgium, but differently. So what we see here in the US is that they have a lot of tools in cybersecurity. So they invested a lot already in tools, but the tools don't necessarily talk to each other. So it's a bunch of tools, but it's not an architecture. If you look at in Europe, they have less tools, but they have much more architectures in which the firewall talks to the antivirus and the antivirus talks to the XDR and that kind of stuff. So that when the antivirus sees a virus, he can immediately say to the firewall, if you see this kind of behavior, stop it, block it, whatever. So you have much more of that in Europe, and you have much more tools in the US, if that makes sense.
It does. It's interesting. What do you attribute that to? Because that feels like I would speculate. I mean, obviously, I'm biased because I come from a managed services perspective, as do you. And making sure that that tools are integrated for monitoring, detection, and response, and that sort of thing, right? That's sort of critical. You can't really do security without that. So, do you think the implicit assumption was the tools themselves will sort of eliminate the problem, or is it more our internal folks will figure out how to use these brilliant tools to help keep us safe? Was it more a function of good salesmanship on the tool side, right? What do you chalk that up to from your perspective?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. And another thing that I would like to add on those two is that I think Americans are early adopters when it comes to new products, and in Europe they're lacking behind. Well, not lacking behind, but they're waiting until a product is much more proven. One of our partners is Palo Alto Networks, which is a American company, of course. And what we see is that all the new products get sold faster here in the US, more early than as opposed to in Europe. And maybe that's also one of the reasons why it is different.
That makes sense. Yeah. And so that being on that front line of new tech, right? And I'll call it the shiny object. That sounds negative. I don't necessarily mean it that way, but looking for the latest and greatest, right? In terms of technology, right? And a lot of that stuff is being created here, or being aggressively sold here, right? Because we've got a huge market for obvious reasons.
That is correct, yeah. And a lot of times it's also a bit the marketing, because, for instance, in MDR, they say, well, we do incident management and response, but response most of the times means that they will send you an email when they see something wrong. They don't necessarily actually solve it, right?
Right. That's a response, but maybe it's a pretty limited one, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you should look further than that, of course.
Right.
Further than the marketing stuff, right?
So you've hinted at a little bit. What has surprised you about sort of the initial stages of entering the U.S. market? What were expectations versus where you are now? And that could be good or bad. I just was curious in terms of that experience.
Well, one is what I would like to say is actually neutral, or even a bit more positive. I think for US is that you have to, just for the audience, Belgium is like smaller than any state in US, right? So okay, so we are in Ghent, and if you go to a customer near Ghent, they find it very interesting that you're in Ghent, because you're very close by, and everything is they're very fond of that. If you're an hour away, that's already far for Belgium. So if the company is an hour away, they're like, yeah, but you're not so close by, that kind of stuff. So we entered US. So we entered in Raleigh, North Carolina. So we were targeting all those companies around Raleigh, North Carolina, And we thought, of course, that, well, we're close by here, so that's very interesting for you. And they were like, no, we have our company in Seattle that does this and that for us, so that's not an issue. So that is very different. The US is very much a global market. It doesn't really matter where you are in the US. You can do business from anywhere. And in Belgium, even it's much smaller, it's much more complex and much more local.
Interesting. I would have not known that, and that's again, I guess that's surprising in both directions. So
exactly.
So it's early to draw. Yeah, it's early to draw conclusions, obviously. But just from what you've seen so far, what can European companies learn from U.S. companies? Again, just kind of first blush.
So what can European companies learn?
Yeah, we'll start there, and then we'll go the other direction from your perspective.
Yeah. Let me think.
And it could be general, or it could be specific to sort of an approach to cybersecurity.
Yeah, what I think that Europeans can learn a lot is that we can act faster when it comes to new technology, because of course it's a good thing that you wait a little bit and make sure that it's proven and it's mature, but also you miss an opportunity, because when you have a lot of very good companies that come to the market with great technology, and if you invest in them very an early stage, and also in a good company that can do the management around it, then you can be in the front of the hacker and not behind the hacker. So a lot of times you first get hacked, and then all of a sudden everybody has budget to do stuff. That's how it goes in Europe. Maybe also a little bit in the US, but I think in Europe a little bit more. If you would have the opportunity to make that go around, then it would be better, of course. Yeah, that's what I think. That's something that we can learn from the US.
And then the other way around. What do you feel like that the U.S. companies could learn from the companies you've worked with in Europe? And obviously, you've got a lot of experience there, so would be curious on this one, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would for sure say GDPR. Our personal data is extremely important, and I think sometimes we take it for granted. But I think that is something that you guys can really grow into. We have, of course, our GDPR Act, and there's some acts coming here in the US as well. But protecting the privacy and telling the companies, telling you why they need your personal data and how they're going to use personal data, and you can easily say, no, I don't want you to do that, or yes, I give you consent that you can use that data for that reason. I think that is very important to the US.
So you can look at that a couple different ways, right? You can look at that as, well, the regulation's coming, so you're gonna have to do it anyway. You might as well go ahead and do it, and that feels like an imposition, right, or a burden. But the way you're couching it sounds more like you see it as potentially a business advantage if you handle data in these ways. So talk a little bit about that for us, because I'm not sure everybody in the audience is that familiar with GDPR. Maybe the more they probably read about it or heard about it, and certainly California has passed something that looks not exactly like GDPR, but similar, right? And so even if you're in the U.S., if you have operations in California, you have customers in California, you might be subject to something similar to GDPR. You might not even realize it. Actually, that's maybe a different problem. But talk a little bit about it from a business advantage perspective.
Yeah. So in general, the GDPR says is that you have personal data, and the only person that can give you consent on using personal data is the person itself, right? So if you capture personal data for one reason or another, you need to make sure that the person knows for what reason you will keep that data and for how long you will keep the data. And any time that you keep it, the person can always say, I want you to delete my data. So the person actually gets his his power back to decide whether or not he wants to give you his data or not. And there's two kinds. You have the regular personal data, and then you have the sensitive personal data. Sensitive meaning everything about your healthcare. Are you in a union or not? What is your religion? What is your race? All that kind of stuff that is considered as sensitive data. If you're not complying with those rules as a company, then you can get fined, and the fine can be up to $10 million or 2% of your global revenue if it's normal data, and it can be $20 million or 4% of your global revenue, whichever one is bigger, by the way, if it's sensitive personal data. So in that way, we get a big push in Europe towards more cybersecurity, of course,
sure,
and also a lot more transparency. Why data is used, how data is used, and why companies need data. And companies really need to think, why do we actually need the birthday of Blink? Can I just email him and do? If you just do mailings concerning your products, you don't need his birthday, right? So it's limiting you, and it's making you think about what kind of data do I need, and what kind of data can I ask for.
And some of that is around, from looking at that from a cybersecurity perspective, the less sensitive data you have, the less coverage area you have to deal with from a protection perspective, correct?
That is absolutely correct. Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
All right, well, let's transition to a little bit different and kind of move away from sort of the European American distinction and talk a little bit more generally. One of the things that is interesting, cybersecurity risk is not necessarily new, but it's fairly new, certainly in the context of the broader technology sphere. And it's definitely changed in the past 10 years, as you guys, your origin story speaks to that. As you look to today, and you've talked to a lot of executives over the years, where do you see gaps between what companies think are security issues versus what are actually security issues? Is there a gap? And if so, what are they from their perception versus what's the reality?
Yeah. So one of the things there is that a lot of times when I look into articles or advertisements that I see on LinkedIn or whatever, they all talk about users being the biggest problem because they click on stuff and then you get a ransomware attack in but I think that's the wrong way of looking at it, right? Users should be a part of the solution. And if you explain very well why you do certain things or why they cannot click on certain things, and you inform them on how to be a good employee for you, and also when they can click, and if they clicked on something that they have to talk to IT about it and that stuff, then they become part of the solution and not part of the problem. And that's one of the cybersecurity issues that that everybody should sits a light on, but it's not really. Yeah, it's not. How do you say that in good English? Yeah, it's the best way to formulate it is that they should be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Right. And I think it's easier sometimes to say it's the users. I mean, it doesn't mean that the users aren't certainly a key surface area, right? But to your point, you're articulating that the responsibility for those users' knowledge and ability to be part of the team, so to speak, is really a company responsibility, rather than just sort of throwing up your hands and saying, "Oh, these users, these employees, they just don't know what they're doing." Judy in accounting clicked on that thing. She's, she just doesn't know what she's doing. Well, your argument is maybe there's a reason for that, and it's not all Judy's fault. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And at the end of the day, the board is accountable, right, for everything that happens within cybersecurity. So it shouldn't be the user's problem, right? And if I have only $1 to invest in cybersecurity, I will invest it in my employees.
Got it. Okay, that's useful, because I do think it's funny, because I think about the amount of training and sort of cybersecurity awareness, knowledge and that sort of stuff has kind of gotten a bad rap. I think somewhat earned by the early versions of that weren't very good. It was very dry and not particularly interesting to an employer. It was focused around regulatory regimes or that sort of thing, rather than, hey, here's how you can help us and here's why it matters. But I think that's gotten a lot better. But I still think there's a perception, at least on this side of the pond, that that's sort of fluff, or there was a bit of a check the box mentality around cybersecurity awareness training, and I think that you seem to be speaking to that as we probably need to rethink that perspective and try to change that perception for sure.
Yeah, indeed, and not just training, because everybody at the end of the day is fed up with training on cybersecurity. You need to make it more interesting, like gamification, like making sure that there's adverts on the wall and that kind of stuff, right? Not doing.
Not sitting in a classroom looking at a PowerPoint. When I say training, I'm really using that term in the broadest sense, right? It could be, ongoing software that does, lots of, simulations, and then there's learning around that, and there's, to your point, there's gamification. Maybe there's rewards, there's incentives to help people understand that sort of thing beyond, training as in I got to go to school to learn what cybersecurity is. That's not really what that really hasn't served us very well, frankly. Okay, a couple questions before we wrap up. You alluded to it earlier, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm trying to get my head around, because I've used this before, and I'm not sure if I should be using this anymore. And this is this idea of cybersecurity spending as insurance, right? It's paying premiums to protect yourself against bigger losses. And that's certainly an important part of it. But you mentioned earlier something that makes me think, and again, I've been rethinking this a little bit. Is it also, can we help think about it as an investment in potential competitive advantage? And if we want to think of that, you're the sales guy at Spotit. Help me think about that. Help me think about that idea of cybersecurity spending within the context of investment.
Yeah. So of course, in a way, it is kind of an insurance, right? So if something happens and you don't have it, you have a lot of problems. If something happens and you have it in place, then you can save a lot of money, right? So in that way, already it is a differentiator. And so if you have it, then your operations doesn't stand still because you have a ransomware attack, and technology can take it away. Then of course you already solved a big part. But the main thing is also what I talked about earlier is, as a cybersecurity partner or a managed provider in general, you need to be on the business value side. You need to understand what the customer needs, what drives him, what the customer, what does he want to be in the world, right? And you need to make sure that your cybersecurity is focusing, the vision that you have together with the company is focusing on that. So also make sure that the cybersecurity isn't seen as something that is hard and you need to fill out your password 15,000 times, and you need to be on the solution side and not on the annoying side, right? So it's very important. That's why most of the times we start with an assessment to really understand the business value of the customer. What is their vision? What do they want to be now and in 5 years? And how can we make sure that cybersecurity also follows the same vision and actually make sure that they can do what they actually want to do. If they want to be the best at R&D, make sure that the R&D files do not get hacked, not by any Chinese or whatever, so that they can actually evolve towards that, and they don't see cybersecurity as a hurdle. I think that's the main thing that I can.
Yeah, I like that. The idea of, finding ways to make cybersecurity both front and center and make sure that the team is aware of it, but also efficient enough and leverage tools in a way, to your point, to make it where they're not cursing the cybersecurity regime every day because it's putting hurdles in the way of them being able to do their job, right? Or be able to be successful. So
yeah,
I think that's a good, that transitions into kind of my last little bit here. I want to ask, and kind of want to circle back to the company. And as you think about, you've been at this now, you and Frederick have been at it for almost 10 years. You've seen good growth, by all means, a success, but I know enough to know that you don't feel like we're done and we're ready to ride off into the sunset. So when you think about the future of Spotit, let's say, 3 to 5 years, we don't have to go 50 years. We don't have to go next month. What excites you when you think about that future? When you guys are together, what gets you going? What gets the juices flowing?
Yeah. So what excites us, of course, making sure that all the companies that we help, and not only companies but also the people that are working in it, that they are safer online. That not only themselves but also their family are safer online. That excites us, and that is why we still want to grow. We want to grow faster than we are today, and we mainly do that with a white glove service. So we're not the cheapest in the market, but also not the most expensive one. But we're very much focused on added value and being very close to our customers. So we don't want to have thousands of customers. We want to have hundreds and service them extremely well. So that quality excites us. We want to deliver quality to all of our customers. Quality is much more important than revenue, we say, within our company, and we really mean that. And if we look at the future, we want to do more of the same. So we don't want to broaden our portfolio. We don't want to do servers or storage or that kind of stuff. We want to be true to our vision and strategy. And if we want to grow, we look at growth internationally, so to Asia as well, and then start up some local sales offices in Europe and Latin America, that kind of stuff.
Got it. Okay, and not to end on a negative note, but on the flip side of that, what scares you when you think about that future? Where do concerns lie in you and Frederick's brains?
So yeah, when you look at cybersecurity, I feel nowadays that hackers are always one step ahead of us, because every new technology that comes out doesn't only come out for us. Like artificial intelligence is for the good people very good, but for the bad people also very interesting to abuse, right? So it's a very scary world out there. So we are very much needed in the world to protect everybody. So it scares me on the one hand, but in the end, it's like every Marvel movie there is, the goods always win.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's a good one to end on in terms of the business question. Business questions. I always like to wrap up with something personal, not that personal, but personal in terms of things that you like and that you're interested in. And ideally, I've played around with a variety of different versions of this, and I've heard this question on other podcasts, and I think I'm fine to freely sort of steal it. And that's, share something with us that you've read or consumed or watched lately that you think others ought to check out.
Well, I'm going for the book. It's called Anti-Fragile. I don't know if you heard of it. It's the guy who made the Black Swan. I forgot the name of the author, but Anti-Fragile. Yeah, exactly. That the guy. So I read. It actually changed my life. Anti-Fragile, that book. So that's why I bring it up. And it's about the fact that you don't really have a word for the opposite of fragile, right? Everybody thinks of robust, but it's not the exact opposite, because the exact opposite of fragile means that if you break something, it comes back stronger, right? Because that's how that concept he explains first, and then in the book he will give you real life examples on how to be anti-fragile, and it's extremely valuable.
Excellent. I actually have read it. It's been a couple of years, and I ought to go back and read it again because, to your point, it's sort of it's a bit brain expanding in a good way, and some insights there around. I mean, because we all deal with, we're all going to get kicked around in life. That's part of it, right? Whether that's as a company or as an individual. And so, how do you deal with that, right? How do you put yourself in a position to benefit from that, and despite the fact that in a perfect world you wouldn't have those things happen, but they do. And so how do you be prepared? So
it's a bit like never waste a good crisis, right? If something goes wrong or sideways, how can you come back stronger? That's what the book is about.
Got it. Well, that's a good note to quit on, Stephen. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's getting late there. Again, really excited to have you on. Excited to have Spotit as a partner and to work with you guys going forward. Frederick, Colin, the team over there. Really excited about that. So thanks again for taking time for being on Cut the Shit. Hope you have a good day.
Thank you. You too, Bryan.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on TikTok @CutTheShitPod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel @Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.